Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to the Canadian Nurses Association webinar series, Progress in Practice. CNA has partnered with Community Health Nurses of Canada, Community Health Nurses Leadership Institute, in a series of webinars to support leadership development of public health nurses. The first webinar was held Tuesday, January the 23rd, and the recorded webinar will be posted next week. The first webinar focused on the development of the public health leadership competencies, introduced the organizational readiness for change tool, and the relationship to the LEADS framework was discussed. This second webinar is an excellent example of how nursing has led in the adoption of the public health leadership competencies in one organization. There are 3 webinars planned. The third webinar is planned in March 2018, but we don't have a date yet. This webinar is titled Applying a Growth Mindset to Public Health Leadership Competencies. This session is being recorded for nurses who are unable to participate today. My name is Ruth Schofield, and I'm an assistant professor at Master University and the CHNC, Community Health Nurses Leadership Institute Chair. I'll be moderating this webinar. At the end of the presentation, we will answer your questions, and the presenter, Hamida, will also be asking questions in the presentation as well. But you can type in the Q&A box that you see to the right of the slide. We will address them as many questions as time allows at the end. And just to give you a sense of the resources that will be useful for you as you today, so you can access them. And one of them is the leadership competencies for public health practice. As you will see in the web link 3 in the bottom of your screen below the slide, this is where you can access the competencies under public and resources. Public publications. And that's where you can access the leadership competencies, and you will be able to, it's a read-only version, but then you can also access, it's a PDF downloadable, the Organizational Readiness for Change tool, which is available if you choose to open it. And now, a little bit about our presenter, Hamida Bhimani. Hamida is the lead or head of nursing practice for York Region Public Health, with responsibilities for leading strategic initiatives in the areas of nursing practice and leadership. She is the president of the Ontario Association of Public Health Nursing Leaders, whose mission is to promote and protect the health of Ontarians through the excellence in public health nursing leadership. And now, over to Hamida to start the presentation.
Thank you, Ruth. And hello, everybody. I see there's about 72 people who have joined the webinar and more coming on. So I'm really honored to be able to speak about the concept of learning agility, and I hope you find this webinar useful in helping you see how might you look at your nursing practice, whichever role you're in frontline, in middle management, or team lead positions in your organizations. How could you apply that into your current setting? And throughout the webinar, I've got a little bit of an opportunity for you to give me some input through the Q&As, through the chat box that you have. So hopefully you will engage, and we will sort of make this a bit more interactive, especially because it's online. So as Ruth was saying, my focus is going to be about the concept of learning agility and how we can apply it to ourselves. And Carol Dweck, who has researched and coined the word growth mindset. And growth mindset and learning agility are connected, and I'll explain to you how. She spoke about growth mindset, and she has this quote that I believe describes the essence of a growth mindset. In a growth mindset, people believe that their most basic abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work. brains and talent are just a certain point. So that's where you start, she says, according to her. And her concepts are very much well known in the education field. And she presents and talks about how students who only look at themselves from a talent perspective, who think they're intellectually quite good, often end up in the long run not doing as well as those who actually have a love of learning and a resilience that is essential for great accomplishment. So you see this slide that I have here, two mindsets that are shown for you. The fixed mindset is on the left and growth mindset is on the right. And I'll just walk you through and read through the slide so you kind of see a little bit more of a description of what are the differences between a fixed versus growth mindset. So in a fixed mindset, you will see that the individuals are avoiding challenge, versus in a growth mindset, it's about embracing challenges. In terms of when you look at the obstacles, fixed mindset individuals give up easily, and growth mindsets persist in the face of setbacks. In terms of effort, fixed mindset where people are thinking, okay, I'm intelligent, I'm talented, they often see effort as fruitless or worse. And on the other hand, those who are in a growth mindset see effort as a path to mastery. And then there's the piece around criticism, where fixed mindset individuals ignore useful negative feedback. And on the other side, growth mindset learn from criticism. And then there's the success of others, where fixed mindset individuals often are threatened by the success of others, versus those who are in the growth mindset find lessons and inspiration in the success of others. So what you see as a result is that growth mindset individuals, they reach ever higher levels of achievement. And all of this gives them a sense of, I would almost say, freedom in terms of, and also an optimistic, like a positive mindset. So they feel that they can, through hard work, achieve something that might not, that they might feel like, okay, this is something that I could have done. I have the opportunity. If I work hard enough, set goals, I'll reach there. Versus the fixed mindset is almost like they give up very easily. So a little bit on the next slide, and I'll define how we look at growth mindset and learning agility and how they two connect. So growth mindset, I've spoken a lot. I've given you some characteristics that define growth mindset. And then the next step to that is learning agility. And what I mean by that is learning agility is a set of practices, leadership practices, I would say. And what they allow you to do is for those who are in a growth mindset mode, when you apply the learning agility practices, you develop, you grow, and when you use the strategies, learning agility strategies, you are more effective. You equip yourself to deal with complex problems that you face in your work. And we'll talk about the different components of learning agility further in the presentation. But what for high learning agile individuals, they handle ambiguity and attack novel situations by looking at a series of strategies. They take unrelated experiences from their past to resolve the current challenges that they're facing. Another key component is that they take the time to reflect, seek to understand not only what happened if they came across a failure, but they actually try to understand why that happened and how they could have contributed to that failure, but also how might they address that failure in a different way through themselves and others. So a key to learning agility is that having a growth mindset, but also having a set of practices that put you into a continuous learning mode, and they really utilize reflection and learning from your experiences. May they be positive or negative. So that's in a nutshell what learning agility is. And when you look at the trajectory of learning agile individuals, you see three things. And you might be a little bit surprised by this. So you see that they're much more focused, and I'll talk about what that means. Their personality is that they're less accommodating. And sometimes in healthcare, we think less accommodating people are rebellious and they're no good. But actually less accommodating people are defined as agile learners. And then you see often the term resiliency. They demonstrate resiliency. So what does focus mean? Focus really means that when you look at a learning agile individual, they're very organized, they're driven, and they have a method to their madness. They're very particular about how they do things and how they learn from the way they do things. And they're continually refining and polishing themselves. In terms of being less accommodating, you will often think of, as I was mentioning, these individuals as rebellious. But what that means is they are actually not afraid to challenge the status quo. And that's really critical in the current healthcare environment that we're in. They welcome engagement, and they express their opinions. And sometimes, in our environments, we might think of these individuals as the ones who are trying to push our buttons, or the ones who are trying to always bring up things in a way that we might not traditionally think. We think of them as the troublemakers, but in fact, they're agile learners. And then there's the resiliency piece. And I think that's critical in terms of they show up as more at ease, they're more calm, they rebound from stressful events quickly. And we know how important this is because in our practice environment, we deal with a lot of complex issues all the time. A last piece that I want to talk about that I've seen in agile learners is humility. So that means a capacity invaluable to all leaders at all levels is that you're showing a characteristic of a willingness to learn and to show that often when you are successful, your humility comes in from the angle that you see it as work that not only did, but you did it with a team, you did it with organizational support, and you did it for the greater good. So this humility piece really is important for agile learning as well, especially because agile learners are not so afraid of failure. They see it as an opportunity to grow and learn. So what are some components of learning agility that I was mentioning earlier? And there are 4 components on the left that are enablers, and then on the right, there are derailers. And I want you to now at this point just start to think, as I'm speaking through this slide, I'm giving you some background context, to think of your strengths as an agile learner as I walk through the definitions of the components of learning agility. And I'm sorry I didn't mention this earlier, but if you have a piece of paper and a pen ready for an exercise that we'll do later on, if you want to start to look for something so that you can put something on paper, as I give some instructions a little bit later. So learning agility enablers. So innovating is an enabler. And what we mean by that is that and I've mentioned this earlier, the innovating looks like questioning the status quo and challenging long-held assumptions with the goal to discover new and unique ways of doing things. So it's not just to bug someone or talk about things and cause issues, but it's actually to look at a new way of doing things. And often innovating requires you to put yourself in new experiences and it provides perspective, a different perspective to an agile learner, and it grows one's knowledge base. So that's critical. And often innovating also allows agile learners to look at issues from multiple angles and perspectives. So the next enabler is performing. And performing is being able to achieve results, to deliver when things are challenging. So often when things get challenging, we sometimes tune out. And what agile learners do is they remain present and engaging. They stay engaged, they handle the stress, they're still listening, and they're trying to, at that time, solve the situations, the problems that they're facing by gathering data, by processing the data quickly. So most of us, when we're in stressful situations, the way our brain is organized, tend to shut down and just go into autopilot and perform. But performing for a critical component of learning agility is actually performing well and processing new data quickly. to make some decisions. And a lot of that means listening and observing. And that requires a different type of a skill set. And then there's a piece around reflecting, and being in the healthcare professional and nurses, we do a lot of reflecting. So that's taking time to reflect on your experiences. And reflecting is, a component of reflecting is also looking at feedback and spending time and energy processing information to better understand ourselves. So leading self, understanding our assumptions and behaviors so that we understand who we are, what our triggers are, what our personality is like, and how do we respond to situations when we're under stress. And another component is risking. So risking is venturing into unknown territory and putting oneself out there. And often learning Agile individuals, this component comes out in the sense that they put up their hands for new projects, new initiatives, but also in their life, in their day-to-day life, they may be those folks who are going to take those adventurous new trips, go out into the wild and do interesting things. If that's like doing risk-taking activities, measured risk. I don't mean like jumping off a cliff without a harness and things like that. I mean measured risk. But they do things that are outside their comfort zone in their day-to-day life as well. And the whole idea is stretching yourself beyond your comfort zone, which then that teaches you how to learn quickly, process data when you're in a situation where you're in a measured, risky situation, and then be able to sort of perform, reflect, and innovate altogether. Now, a derailer is that for learning agilities, individuals or like a characteristic is someone who is defensive. And so when they're given feedback or challenged, it lowers your learning agility. You're not able to cope with that, and you're not able to adapt to the situation. And so the derailer is quite an important piece because it kind of negates all the other enablers. And that's something that you need to think about in terms of yourself. So, but there's also lots of enablers. And generally people will find they have some enablers that are at an average level that they can heighten through practice and reflection. And then they have the derailer. And if they have the derailer, they need to really figure out a plan on how to eliminate the derailer because that sort of negates a lot of, that can have a negative impact overall in one's performance and being an agile learner. So in terms of the next slide, what I wanted to do was do an exercise with you just to make this a little bit more, make you think about it and apply it to yourself rather than just all this theory. I've been talking so much, so I feel like we need to sort of have you think about a little bit about yourself and how do you show up as a learner. And the preface I want to give here is that you're not going to be just all left side or right side, and I'll speak to you a little bit about that like in detail in a few moments. You're going to fall somewhere with some characteristics of the learning agility components where you are less agile as a learner and some things that are going to be good about you. And that's the piece around growth mindset again, right? Where you can take what you see today here and assume that you're never going to be able to move on your agility to learn, or you're going to come up with a plan to say, okay, how do I become a more agile learner? There's some things I'm doing well and some things I want to work on. And that's just how we are as humans. Right, we're not going to be perfect at everything, but the idea is that we grow and learn. So if you have a piece of paper and a pen in front of you, I would like you to draw a table with 3 columns. And I'll just pause so as people are doing that. And in the first column, if you don't mind writing out, so 3 columns, and I would like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows. And in the first column, in the first row, on the leftmost column, right, if you can write the words innovate. And then underneath it on the second row, first column, perform. And then the third row, first column, reflect. And fourth row, take risks, first column. And then defend on the last row, first column. And these, as you know by now, is that these are the components of learning agility. And I'm going to read out some statements. And in the second and third column, so one or two, don't check off on both columns. I'd like you to check off, if I read the statement, if you agree with the statement on the left, then you check off the second column. If you agree with the statement on the right, check it off on the right. And I'll go through each component of learning agility one by one. So innovate. So under innovate, we have this particular, and I'll read the whole piece, these two statements. Challenge the status quo in an attempt to make improvements, experiment with new ideas, and endeavor to find the best solution to each individual problem. If you're more like that, put a check here. Then the other set of companion statements are, try to achieve the best with what I have at my disposal, choose the most readily available solution, and move on to the next challenge. So if you're more like that, then check off in the third column, first row. Okay, so this is for innovate. Then we move on to perform. So under perform, the first set of statements are, pick up on subtle cues to build a better understanding of the problem. Stay calm when faced with a challenge or stressful situation. So put a check mark if you feel you're more like this. Now, on the other companion statements are, trust my intuition to guide me to a solution. Use stress as energy to get things done more quickly. So check this off if you feel this is more like you. So this would be in the third column, second row, perform. Then we get into reflection. Make time to critically reflect on my experiences, examine past failures for lessons. So check off if you are more like that. And then the companion statements for this is on the other side are, move quickly from one task to another in order to accomplish more. Put failure quickly behind me in order to focus on the next challenge. If you're more like this, then put a check mark here. Then take risks. So volunteer for roles that are ambiguous, new, or otherwise challenging. Take enjoyment from struggling with the challenging problem. Check off if you're more like this, but the companion statements are, take on challenges where I know I can be successful. Take enjoyment from managing a well-oiled machine. If you're more like this, check off this, which will be your third column, fourth row. Defend. Consider my personal role in both successes and failures. Seek feedback because I need it. Check off if you're more like this. On the other side, take credit for success and quickly make excuses for failure. Listen to feedback because others want to give it. If you're more like that, please check off that section. So what this kind of, and I'm going to go to the new slide and the next slide, and explain a little bit about what this sort of this quick exercise we did. If you identify with the statements on the left, you may already have many of the components of learning agility. And if you fall on the right, there may be some opportunity for improvement where learning is concerned. Again, I would not take this as like a complete science, and I would not also take this that if you're more on the right-hand side, so if you checked off quite a few things in column 3, that you're not an agile learner. I think what it means is it gives you a self-assessment. And remember that we have strengths and areas of improvement. So I wouldn't imagine that everybody falls all the way to the right. Some of you may have said between the sets of statements, you're kind of in the middle. And what that means is that's a good piece because then you have opportunity to grow. And you can take some of the components that I've talked about and apply that into your practice. And I'll give you some types of learning experiences because you're probably wondering, okay, great, now I've done an assessment. Where do I seek an opportunity to become more of an agile learner and to incorporate or to get better at the components that I was describing just a few slides ago? So the types of things that you can think of is, or the types of projects or things you may want to put your hand up for at work, or even in volunteer opportunities is things like looking for turn around, fix-it projects, or when you have an underperforming unit in your organization or a team, volunteer to be the one who would be the team lead for it or the supervisor. Or someone who becomes part of that team to help fix an underperforming unit. Increase your job scope. Ask for more responsibilities without a promotion. That's another opportunity. Taking horizontal moves, transferring or rotating to different functions or job at the same level. So we as nurses often have that opportunity to try a new program area, a new unit in the hospital, a different area in the community that we're practicing in. New initiatives, create a new service, product, or brand. Look for volunteer experience and take a leadership role in a community organization that you're interested in volunteering. Another one is taking on stakeholder engagement, forming a partnership or joint venture across organizations. Mistake, look at a mistake you've made that's affected your team or unit or organization and reflect on that and see how might you be able to do better or fix that mistake through learning. For those who might be in more management kind of roles or where you have conflict on your team, learning to deal with difficult people. And further that, if you're more in a supervisory role, how to handle performance problems with people who report to you. Another one is mentoring or coaching and providing feedback through the mentoring and coaching process. And another learning agility piece is which nurses do well is going for higher learning, pursuing advanced degree certification, coursework, and training. That also makes you an agile learner. So based on the sort of quick mini assessment we did, these are some experiences you may want to seek out in order to, if you want to improve your learning agility. So now I'm hoping that we can spend a few minutes looking at, I went ahead, sorry, with a reflection question for the chat box. And in your view, what you will see is a bubble. And the bubble, and you can type in the bubble. And I'm putting the question is here on the slide. And what I'd like to, just based on what we did with the mini assessment and then the different types of opportunities I talked about that you could seek out. And I'm sure you've had experience, like we all grow and learn throughout our career journey. I'm sure you've had experiences where you are thinking about, or you might be thinking about experiences where you might apply learning agility in your practice. So what I'd like you to do is please type one unique insight on how you might apply learning agility in your practice. And I'm sorry, the question on the PowerPoint, I'm just realizing, has a bit of a typo. So the second bullet on the PowerPoint, one unique insight on how, it shouldn't say on how you might apply learning agility in your practice. And then if you are able to, just in the next couple, whilst I'm working through the other slides, if you're able to put your answers down to that. And what we'll do is we'll take up what you're putting, your ideas, your suggestions. So they're not really answers, it's your ideas and suggestions. And I think we're going to type the question out in the bubble right now.
So it's Ruth, just to help with this Q&A section. You'll see to the right of the slide it says Q&A at the very bottom. There's an area that has an opportunity for you to put your comment, and then you'll see it come up. So that, just so you know what Hamida is saying. Thanks.
Okay, and I'm going to post on the question, one unique insight on how you might apply learning agility. Bear with me, I'm sorry, I'm doing a few things all at the same time. Learning agility in your practice. So just the way I'm typing in, if you would like to type in something, a response to this over the next couple of slides, then we'll kind of see what you are saying, and it'll be a nice sort of reflection and engagement in the webinar. But I'll move on to the next slide, and I hope people are able to see what's been posted. I believe you are able to see it. So whilst you're thinking about that question, I want to go through a case study that I found. And I found it through the Harvard Business Review, and then I modified it to our sort of like healthcare organizations. The Harvard Business Review had a more of a, I would say, a business private sector slant, and I changed it slightly. So I'd like to read this case study and then share some thoughts on what characteristics or components of learning agility I thought Sandy, who's our our case study character displayed, and what are some learning agility components she may want to work on in her future. So I'll read this out. So on the surface, Sandy looked like the perfect up-and-coming manager for a new team designed to bring nursing informatics and data analytics forward within her teaching hospital. She had recently completed her master's in nursing with a focus on nursing informatics and technology. Her track record was flawless, and she had been a team lead for 2 years, rolling out the new electronic case management system for the organization. She worked well across teams and stayed very calm under pressure, especially when the electronic case management system had glitches. Every goal or objective the organization had ever put in front of her, she had crushed without breaking a sweat and despite having multiple demands. So some things around learning agility when I think about Sandy is that what are some things that she has already on that checklist that we looked at? I would say, like, based on what the case study offers, she performs well. She in terms of the performing component of learning agility, she has the ability to perform well when faced with a challenge, when she's under pressure. And then in terms of taking risks, I would think that from what has been put forward, often we know with technology, there are things that that might go wrong. There might be areas where she might face failure. So the project, obviously the electronic case management system that she put into play was a new project with lots of ambiguity. And so I would say she's high on the taking risk component of learning agility. And so the other side of this case study, and I wasn't meaning to make it doom and gloom, so I hope you don't mind. But the other side was where there might be areas where Sandy could improve. So the case study continues, and we state here that, but something broke when Sandy took on the role of manager for this new team. She struggled with the ambiguity and didn't take prudent risks. She quickly dismissed several key opportunities to reach out for feedback and guidance from leadership in both formal and informal roles. It became clear that Sandy had succeeded in the past by doing what she knew and operating rather conservatively within her domain. It also became clear that the organization was not going to be able to achieve one of its strategic initiatives. So this case study continues, and we see that Sandy might be needing some perspective and look at her learning agility from a different angle. And there might be in areas where she needs to develop herself further and also to leverage her strengths a little bit more. So if you look at one area that pops up for learning agility is the defending component. And based on what the case study is saying, in terms of taking feedback, maybe this is an area where listening to feedback, she's the ability to actually listen to the feedback is different than seeking feedback. So a learning agile person actually goes out and actively seeks feedback. And this is where you see in the case study it's saying that she's dismissing opportunities to do that. And that's obviously impeding the way her position is, how she's in the new role of manager. I'd say a strength here is that she actually took the role of a manager, which is risk-taking again. And that's the characteristic of learning agility that Sandy is able to, I would say, maintain in her new role. And that's something that she can build on and hopefully take that strength further in order for her to be successful and achieve this strategic initiative for the organization. Another area of learning agility that questioned in this case study is her ability to reflect. So she might be using old tactics that worked for her when she was a team lead, and now she's in the role of a manager. And when she was the team lead for the electronic case management system, maybe certain things really worked well, But now that she is in putting this new area together, it may be more looking for buy-in at senior management level and motivating the team to do the work rather than her doing all the work. And so there's a different sort of strategies that need to come into play as things become more complex. And the reflection is really critical because that's what makes you think about what are you doing well, what could you be doing differently, and this is a new situation versus the last one. What did I learn in my first position versus this one? So that's where maybe the reflection component of learning agility might need to be sort of enhanced in Sandy's situation. So the case study gives you a little bit of idea of how you may want to apply this in your own current practice, depending on the type of work you do. And I think I was just going to pause a bit to say, have people been able to post things? Because I don't see anything in the chat box.
Yeah, there is a number of responses that you can see under Q&A. So yeah, people are certainly putting their comments and responding to your reflection.
Oh, great. Okay, excellent. Okay, it's very hard to get any feel of, because I can't hear people, what's happening. Okay, fantastic. Great. So we'll look at some of those comments after this slide, and I think we have sufficient amount of time to do that. I'm so excited to see people that you're engaged in what I'm saying. Excellent. So we'll read some of your comments in a few minutes. So my last slide really from putting this together and looking at the leadership competencies. So the Community Health Nurses of Canada Public Health Leadership Competencies are based on the LEADS framework, which I have shown here on the right. It's LEADS. And the LEADS framework forms, I would say, is the foundational theoretical basis for the public health leadership competencies. And at York Region Public Health, we've used the LEADS framework for a leadership program that we implement here. And the connection I see between LEADS and learning agility is it's a nice connection. So what I find is that if you're looking at the LEADS framework, and the L stands for leading self, the E stands for engage others, the A stands for achieve results, the D is developing coalitions and partnerships, and the S is systems transformation. So that's on the right. When you are going to apply the learning agility components, there is the innovate, let's say the first component of learning agility. Well, innovation is very connected to the systems transformation domain of the LEADS framework, right? And LEADS is, as I was mentioning earlier, the foundational framework for the public health leadership competencies. So when you're innovating, you are looking at trying things differently. Like in Sandy's case, we're saying, maybe the strategies that might have worked in one project may not work in a different project. So you need to be able to find a different way of doing your day-to-day business. If you look at the performing component of learning agility, it connects nicely to the LEADS framework under achieve results. So performing is a lot about, as I was explaining earlier, about dealing with complex issues, complex problems, and not giving up, kind of dealing with ambiguity. And that connects back to systems transformation domain of the LEADS framework, where you are dealing with, I would say, again, it's connected to the achieve results, not systems transformation, where you need to be able to deliver and make progress despite the fact that you may be facing setbacks. So performing is connected to achieving results domain. So there's a connection between the two theories, right? Then you looked at the reflection component of learning agility, reflect. So reflection a lot, as I've mentioned, and I won't go on, but it's really connected to the lead self component of the public health leadership competencies. Your self-awareness, knowing your triggers, your ability to understand yourself, to do that deep thinking. What's your personality like? Are you an introvert? Do you need to be more in the middle in order to engage people? Looking at both your failures and successes, not just your successes. So that reflection component is really important in both learning agility, and it comes up in the LEADS framework under lead self. And then you have the take risks. And take risks, of course, as we learned today in learning agility, is about doing new things. It's taking on calculated risks and being open to taking on, putting up your hand for those different projects. And a lot of taking risks is challenging the status quo and dealing with ambiguity again. And I think it connects well with the systems transformation domain of the LEADS framework. And then you have defend, the last component, right, of learning agility. And that is, again, connected, I would say, to the public health leadership competencies, the framework, the LEADS, under LEAD Self, the L part. And defending is really about being open to listening and seeking feedback, not just when feedback is given to you, but actually going out and actually looking for feedback. So if you do look for that feedback to improve, then you're not being defensive. And that's a key component, and that links into, of course, the leading self part of the public health leadership competencies. So with that, the pieces that we've been talking a little bit about, like the more theoretical part of the presentation is over, but let's go to you and look at the chat box and read some of these. It says, one unique insight, I asked you the question, one unique insight on how you might apply learning agility in your practice. And let's see what some of you said, because I think your engagement and your understanding will help each other for you to really crystallize the learning agility concept. So Ruth, I can't see the whole thing.
If you click up in, you should be able to click up in either area.
Okay.
And you can see everybody's comments, and everybody should see each other's comments now. We just arranged that you could do it. At one point you couldn't, so now you can.
Okay, great. So Claire says, reflect on something that didn't go the way I expected it to. So that's important. That's the way how you're going to apply learning agility. Thank you. And then Bev is saying, schedule intentional time for reflection. Excellent. I think that's the piece around, really taking that opportunity to build in time. We often are so busy, right, in our practice. I would like to take more risks, volunteer for new opportunities that will stretch me beyond my comfort zone and enjoy the struggle. Thank you, Susan, for that. And, I think sometimes we think volunteering for new opportunities, especially if it doesn't come with a, how can I say it, like a higher role, is not going to help us. And I think sometimes that's a misnomer. Putting yourself, volunteering, getting yourself noticed, and learning from that is really critical. So thank you, Susan. Kate is saying, seek out a colleague and supervisor to provide feedback for my insights on my performance. So, seek out a colleague or supervisor to get feedback and insights on how you are doing in your performance. That's excellent, right? And sometimes we shy away from feedback, and that is a little bit of it's to our detriment, right? I know it's hard to take feedback sometimes, but you will find that peers give you feedback that is a little bit more, I would say, tempered and more, it's given in a more humanistic way. And obviously, it's your supervisor, obviously, because of the compensation or the way you're doing. But I love the colleague idea. And colleagues can really give you nice insights. Also, that's my question there. So we'll go. Tanya is saying, make time to incorporate reflection into my day. So important, but it gets busy and hard to do. And that's exactly it. And, I think you all need to think about how you reflect. And, do you reflect on your drive home? Or you reflect in the shower? You reflect by writing a journal, but put aside a time to do that. And that's really critical for learning agility, as you saw. Laura says, ask for feedback on interviews, projects, presentations. And that's a very good tactical way, because sometimes people are reluctant to give you feedback on you generally as a person, right? And sometimes that's not useful either. So getting very specific to how you did in a project, how you did in that interview and presentation can be very valuable and get you to where you need to go in terms of your other learning agility components, in terms of performing, in terms of innovating. So that's excellent. Thank you. Stephanie, seek opportunities to take on a role outside my comfort zone. Very critical. Very critical. Take something that you're not in your day-to-day and taking you out of that element, right? And then remember that applies both to work life and to personal life. And sometimes taking a role outside and doing an activity outside your personal comfort zone is also very, very helpful in learning, in expanding your learning agility repertoire. Corina says, as a consolidation student on an intensive care unit, I can apply learning agility by actively looking for feedback from my preceptor and other staff on the unit. I can try to take their feedback as an opportunity to grow instead of becoming defensive or feeling inadequate. And I think that's really important for all of us. And thank you for sharing that, because you're sharing that from a student perspective. And I think a key perspective of learning agility is always thinking of yourself as a student. It's always trying to strive to being that mastery, right? But always thinking about that students. And sometimes, you know, Karina, we learn from the students as much as the students learn from us. So that's excellent. Oh, we have quite a few. Let's see. Ooh, all right. I didn't realize I have so many. Ruth, what do you think? Okay, what I will do is take a couple more comments because it's 12:46, right? And then we'll do some questions. Is that good, Ruth?
Yes, that sounds wonderful. And yeah, and if we still have time, we can go back to some of these comments after we've done the questions. So, yeah.
Okay. So Brenda says, finding a difficult conversations coach. I love that. Coaches are fantastic at really making you, I would say, think of your challenge. And sometimes your challenge that you have, that's sometimes what's limiting your progress, or how shall I say it, preventing you from being learning agile, is you yourself. So coach can really ask some great questions to make you think about what is it that's limiting you. And also coaches can make you think about your strengths, which is very critical in learning agility as well. And here's another one from Sarah. I work in a setting with many colleagues who are not healthcare providers. I'm often challenged when trying to incorporate their views on decisions that need to be made. And I think that's critical in terms of learning agility, because looking at others' perspectives, right? And that's what you're saying is, how can I be, when I'm especially not working with healthcare providers, because we have a common language sometimes in healthcare that can be very difficult for others. How do I look at different perspectives, which still will have value, right? And let's just take one more for Joanne. Look for opportunities to try an innovative practice. I love that, very practical. And Dawn is saying, find opportunities to step outside your comfort zone and take on a new challenge at work or in the community, which is all excellent. And then I have one more. I plan to apply learning agility in my personal reflective practice. However, as professional practice lead for our agency, I would also like to help other PHNs become and develop their learning agility growth mindset. And great. So that's wonderful, because you can take this webinar, you can take the components that we did in a little self-assessment, and you can apply it with your colleague nurses. And that would be perfect, because I think one of the things we want to do from here is actually not just keep this learning for ourselves, but practice it with others. And that way we'll get good at it, but we'll also share with our nursing colleagues, which will be a great way to pay it forward. So I'm going to stop with the chat box. Thank you for your engagement. This is really nice to see. And Ruth, I'll pass it back to you.
So I encourage now at this stage, you've done an incredible job of sharing your ideas in reflection to Hamida's presentation. And now we'll open it up to questions. So if you have questions, do the same thing. Add your question, and we'll see them, and then Hamida can respond to them. So we do have a few minutes left. So while we're waiting, I do have a question that we can maybe start with while you're putting in your questions. And so maybe you can think of this, Hamida. Why is learning agility an important concept for nurses and healthcare professionals to apply in our current healthcare environment?
Yeah, so Ruth, my perspective, as you know, there's lots going on in the healthcare field. The Patients First legislation has come. There is the system is shifting in terms of the local health integration networks and integration within those LHINs. For nurses and for other health professionals, especially for nurses, I'd say that Learning agility is important because we are in a situation where we need to continuously learn, right? And someone was saying, I'm a student and I am learning from others, but I think if we want to be leading edge as nurses as a profession and deal with the system changes, we need to have a learning agility mindset, like a growth mindset, and we have to be able to have the notion of continuous learning. And I think continuous learning is well defined through learning agility. It's a very practical, I would say, theory or practical approach. And so I would say if we have this as part of our thinking as nurses, I think we will be successful in transforming our system. Because there's a lot of complexity, right, in the current system. There's lots of change. And by being agile learners, we can adapt to the change and we can bring others along in the change. And we also know as nurses, we're the largest number in the healthcare profession. So we have high influence. And so if we're agile learners, we can influence and shape our environment. We can influence the way clients receive services. There's expansion now in our scope for RNs looking at prescribing. And if we're not agile learners, how are we going to be able to get to those and bring in those new changes to our scope of practice? So I think that's why learning agility, I think, is a very practical tool that we can utilize and which will help us really be successful.
Thanks. That's a great response. And we have somebody else that is asking, what advice do you have on looking for a coach or mentor, any organization?
Okay. So, people, coaches are different than mentors, okay? And it's important to understand the distinction. So a coach is someone who will not bring their personal experience into the conversation, or shouldn't be. Coach should be looking at your goals, should be helping you figure out what your development goals are, your leadership goals are, and should be giving you that sort of coaching in order, and you really ask you good reflective questions to get you where you need to go. Versus a mentor does a little bit of that, but then also provides advice on how they achieve success. So you will learn from their experience. So there's a little bit of difference. In terms of approaching, a coach or a mentor, I ask people from a learning agility perspective, I think you have to be strategic about who you want to ask as your mentor or coach, let's say, for example, and who you will observe. Because I think, let's say you go for a very high-level person who has multiple projects and can only meet with you every 8 months. Okay. Is that going to really deliver to you the attention you need in terms of coaching and mentoring? So I think what you need to have is you have to then have, okay, am I going to observe some people and shadow them, and that's going to be how I'm going to learn about things. And if they're very high level, then maybe that's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to observe some good leaders, and then based on what I'm looking for, I will find a coach or a mentor. And in an organization, you can approach, I would say, depending on the goals, you approach. If you're wanting to be in management, then you ask for someone who is, ask someone to coach or mentor you who is in management. If you want to grow laterally and try a different area in your program or unit, then that's the type of person you'd reach to coach and mentor you. So again, it's going to be based on your goals. And from a learning agility perspective, I think having a coach is more important, I would say, unless your mentor can ask you reflective questions and get you to think about broadly about what is it that you want to achieve, and also connect you. So mentors often connect you in the organization. They talk to you about your experiences. So I hope that helps a little bit and I didn't make it too confusing.
Thanks. And we have somebody else who has asked this question.
Yes.
How would you recommend healthcare providers challenge the status quo when we're often met with resistance and even hostility when bringing forward innovation or improvement ideas or strategies?
Yes. And that's really, I think, it's a good question. And like if I wish I was in person with you because I could draw the bell curve, right? And you have your early adopters for any innovation. You have your middle where then people, your average, like your sort of majority comes a little bit later when you have something new that you're introducing. And then you have your laggards, right, who are kind of right at the end who don't want to come along with what you're trying to introduce. And I think often what we do is we box change or innovation and we try to apply one tactic for all these three groups. So for the early adopters, we apply the same communication tactics, the same approaches for buy-in and the same benefits that we want to demonstrate. And for the middle adopters, we do the same, and for the laggards. And I think what you need to really think is customize and understand for each of those, what is it that you need to do? What tactics do you need to apply? And in terms of using a learning agility approach, what you need to do is be able to, again, listen to feedback, listen to the seek out the feedback, and really, I would say, be very seek out your early adopters, but seek out those people who are going to say no to everything and figure out what works for them. And I think if you have that kind of approach, it really brings you along. And that's where I would also look at the engage others domain of the LEADS framework, which talks about building trust. Because a lot of things around trust is really listening to the other perspective, having your perspective when you're bringing something innovative ideas forward, and look at what the common interest is. Even for those people who don't agree with you fully, there will be something that they want out of what you're doing, some benefit, or there's some need and you have a need, and where can you line up your common interests?
Thanks. And we can probably take one question. We've got a couple of minutes if you can respond to this question, Hamida.
Sure.
Do you have any tips on how to foster and encourage learning agility for my nursing employees?
Okay. I think learning agility for nursing employees, that's an excellent question. How do you get that, right? So today I kind of walked you through, if you don't, like for your employees, I would highly encourage spending time, if you're able to spend 30 minutes, I know we're busy, or to an hour with each of them, 30 minutes if you're very, very busy and have a large number of members in your team, to actually go through the assessment with them that we did. It doesn't take a lot of time. And I think the way you then, so most people like to be organized and like something being given to them in terms of a concrete assessment. So I find this one easy. You have that conversation, but you need to do it in a one-to-one basis. I find when you try to introduce this in a team setting, it's hard. Everybody's at a different level. So that's one suggestion to bring this forward to your nursing employees, is to do the checklist that I did with you, see where they are, and then get them to take it away and think about it. And come back to you the second time you meet with them. Say, so where do you think you landed on that? And why do you think certain things are high for you, certain things you need, are your strengths, certain areas are areas of development, and then ask them, what do you think, how would you put this into practice? Are there projects you're interested in? Are there opportunities where you want to take more of a leadership role and try out some of the learning agility pieces? Let them do the work. But I think planting the seed, having a first conversation, sending them to do some reflection, coming back, to asking them to think about what's in it for them, then coming up with a practical experience where they can apply, right? It could be just in their current role, but they're more in a reflective capability, like more intentionally, they're applying learning agility. And I think to wrap it up with the nursing employees, right, what you do is after they've intentionally applied the learning agility concepts, come back, ask them to do reflection. What they learned, what would they do differently? How are they going to continue using a learning agility approach in their work? Just breaking it down, I think meeting with people individually, I know it's a lot of work, and over time getting their buy-in into things, I think works, and letting them do the work. So you're introducing, go to your, go to your thinking, come back to me, what's the next time? Because I think often when we push our own agenda, I find that people don't really align with it. And that's what I would recommend.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Hamida, for responding, and for everyone on the webinar for sharing your thoughts and your ideas and questions. And so we're going to now move in. It's now near the end, but I think we have a poll that we're going to do, and I'm going to let Leah take it from here.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for all your participation today. So we just have 2 final questions for you. So I'll put them up on the screen for about a minute, and if you don't mind just answering these ones. So the first one is, using the following scale, how likely are you to use the information provided in your day-to-day work? And the second one is, if there are any people in the room with you who didn't register for the webinar, to just help us get an idea of the true audience today and indicate how many. And it looks like there's a lot of people that indicated that this would be really useful, and that's great. Okay, so I'll leave it open a few more seconds. Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Leah. And so we will have this recorded and posted probably in the next week. And you can see here, if you have any questions, feel free to connect with Hamida or myself, and then we will follow up with you. So thank you again for joining us. Have a good day.
So we do post the recordings just quickly on our YouTube channel. So you can see the recording of this and the webinar that we had on Tuesday. Those will be posted early next week. And you're also welcome to download your certificate of participation. You can find that in the files pod just underneath the webinar. There's also a copy of the presentation itself in PDF form if you'd like to download that. We just have a slide here quickly for our biennial convention that's this year in Ottawa. If you're interested in registering, there's more information on our website. So thank you so much to our presenters, to Hamida and Ruth today, and for all of you for all of your participation. So thank you and goodbye.